Are there any restrictions on taking money from international investors? Well, there's a little bit of legal issue here, and so the attorney would have to weigh in for your particular situation. But in general, here's how this works. We operate under Reg D, which is the exemption from the SEC rules to say as long as you're dealing with well-heeled people, we don't have to file registration statements and all the things that other kinds of companies generally have to file. So we're exempt from that. There's also an exemption called Reg S, and Reg S is for those international investors. Now, that doesn't mean that they just bring their money in and you're good to go. The Department of Homeland Security and some of the federal enforcement agencies are very concerned that money launderers are going to bring money into the United States improperly. And the one thing as a hedge fund manager, as a syndicator, promoter, sponsor, one thing you don't want to do is have somebody laundering money right under your feet, because you're going to be considered implicit or complicit with them, and that would just be a disaster for you, including potentially criminal violations and jail time and other kinds of things. So you want to be very careful that you don't find yourself in that situation. The best thing to do is to run the money through regular banking channels. If the money runs through a bank, and most countries are clean, but if the money runs through a bank, then the bank has some responsibility for making sure that everything was good. Even better is run the money through a broker-dealer, because broker-dealers are licensed to inspect the money, make sure that the money's good. They understand how all this sort of thing works much better than most of us who are not trained in that sort of thing. So I would be very careful. Now, there is a restriction on the Reg S people, and that is that they can't trade their shares. They can't sell the shares that they buy from you for at least a year. And there's got to be a legend on their shares that says that they're restricted shares. But, you know, to be fair, all the shares in a private placement are relatively restricted. And the syndicator, typically us, we don't want people changing their shares around, their holdings. We don't want them to do that. So we generally, at least in our private placement and our operating agreement, we have great control over transferability of shares. And if somebody wants to transfer the shares, we have the absolute right to say yes or no. Now, why would you say that? Some people would say, well, gee, Joel, that seems very restrictive. It seems very investor unfriendly. It is a little bit unfriendly. But here's the bottom line, is the people that you take into your deal, I think of them as being on our team. They're going to be on our team, and we're on their team for a long time, several years at the minimum. If you bring somebody in that you like, and then they sell it to the next door neighbor, which turns out to be a noisy person that you don't like, you could be stuck with that person. So you can restrict the way that the shares get transferred. Maybe you only allow them to transfer the economic value of the shares, but not the voting rights of the shares. Those are things that attorneys have to look at and have to be involved with whenever there's a transfer. So if we get a transfer request, we turn that over to our attorney, and the attorney makes a review on that and then helps us to make those decisions. So those are important considerations. But you don't want people trading shares, number one. If people do trade shares, the whole deal could lose its exemption if too many shares are changing hands. So that's the reason that we have to control that. And one of the things that I usually say to people is, you may not like this particular rule, but imagine if a third person, some other partner in the company, traded their shares. As soon as you put it into a third person situation, they start seeing it in a whole different way, and they generally start seeing it your way. So you want to be very careful not to allow too much trading of shares. You want to be very careful who they trade the shares to, and you want to supervise that, and you want to control that. So bottom line is, international investors are great investors, especially if they're people that you relate to, where the money can come in just the right way. You do that, you put it out there, and you could be successful in that arena as you are with the domestic investors. Anyway, listen, this is a great business, so go out and stake your claim.